Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this Sunday. I'm Frederica Whitfield. Facing stinging criticism for his response to Puerto Rico and with his trip to the storm-battered island just now 2 days away, President Donald Trump today undercutting his Secretary of State on whether diplomacy is possible with North Korea. Tweeting this morning, I told Rex Tillerson, our wonderful Secretary of State, that he is wasting his time trying to negotiate with little rocket man. Save your energy, Rex. We'll do what has to be done. This coming on the heels of Tillerson's comments yesterday from Beijing after he met with China's president and said the Trump administration can and does talk directly to Pyongyang. And within the last few hours, a senior administration official told our Jim Sciutto the president's tweets do not change the White House commitment to a diplomatic approach. CNN's Ryan Nobles has been traveling with the president. He's joining us right now from Branchburg, New Jersey, not far from Trump's private golf club where the president is this weekend. So, Ryan, the president's tweet says to his top diplomat, don't waste your time on diplomacy. How is this not a direct contrast to a White House commitment of a diplomatic approach?
It's really hard to wrestle with that question, Frederica. There clearly appears to be some mixed messages coming out of this administration. And as we've learned many times before from the White House, the president's tweets are considered to be an official statement from the White House. So the fact that the president is going out there and essentially telling his Secretary of State via Twitter not to bother with diplomatic negotiations, that is certainly stands in stark contrast to what Rex Tillerson said yesterday in Beijing. Let's first listen to one of the pieces of information that Tillerson relayed to reporters yesterday after those meetings with Chinese leaders.
Secretary, the back and forth tweets with Kim Jong-un, how is that at all helpful to the situation?
We're going to continue to pursue our diplomatic efforts and hope that that's the way we'll solve this. Thank you.
And Tillerson also described the rhetoric between the White House and Pyongyang as overheated. He went on to say, quote, "We are probing, so stay tuned. We ask, would you like to talk? We have lines of communication to Pyongyang. We're not in a dark situation or blackout. We have a couple of channels to Pyongyang. We can talk to them. We do talk to them directly through our own channels." And the fact that the president came out this morning and essentially said, don't waste your time in talking to the leaders in North Korea stands in stark contrast to not only what Rex Tillerson has said in the past, but also what Defense Secretary Jim Mattis has said. He has long said that the diplomatic solution is the best path to peace in this region, and that a military option is the absolute last thing that the United States wants to get involved with. It's hard to understand at this point, Frederica, exactly where the administration stands as it relates to North Korea.
All very confusing. All right, Ryan Nobles, thank you so much in Branchburg, New Jersey. CNN's chief national security correspondent Jim Sciutto joining me now on the phone. So, Jim, I ask you the same thing. The president's tweets that it is pointless to negotiate with Kim Jong-un, but then an administration official telling you that they are still committed to a diplomatic approach with North Korea. Is this not stunning to hear a president of the United States tell his top diplomat, the Secretary of State, not to waste his time on diplomacy?
Well, I think we shouldn't dance around the issue that there is a direct contradiction here, not just in the messages, but it appears the positions coming from the White House, coming from the president himself in his tweets, which are presidential statements. They've shown the direction of Trump's policy in the past during the campaign, and since then they've shown his positions during the campaign and since then. So these are not just meanderings. These are presidential statements. And the president's statement today via Twitter, signaling, it seemed, or at least an impatience or perhaps abandoning the diplomatic path, lies in direct contrast with a statement coming from a senior administration official. I reached out when I saw the tweet and I said, tell me, is the president saying that he is abandoning the diplomatic path? And the answer I was given is we are still committed to a diplomatic approach. So who's right? Is it Tillerson when he says that there were multiple lines of communication open with the North Koreans, or is it the president? And it is a genuinely confusing message, not just for you and me, but more importantly, for U.S. allies and frankly, U.S. adversaries. Because if you are considering a diplomatic path, and if Tillerson is telling the North Koreans through channels that the U.S. is, under certain circumstances, willing to talk, or to the Chinese or to the South Koreans. And the president says this. What are those allies, and what is North Korea supposed to believe? Who do they believe? I have to imagine you would believe the president, since he's the one in charge. But they have to have some whiplash, seeing as they hear one thing and moments later they hear another.
And so I wondered, Jim, it was just yesterday that Rex Tillerson was in China talking about these direct lines of communication with North Korea. Is this the president, essentially kind of slapping the hand even of the secretary, saying it's the president who wants to make the headlines on what is or isn't happening with North Korea?
It's possible, because we know there's precedent for the president seeing something on television and responding to it, even if the comment is coming from, well, we saw that with, for instance, the comment from the Puerto Rico, from the San Juan mayor, but also with members of his own administration. And whether that is dissatisfaction with how the position was articulated, or just him expressing his own internal doubts about a U.S. position, we just don't know. And when you look at the list of cases like this, it's certainly not confined to North Korea, because let's look back at the last several months. The president orders, for instance, the decommissioning of transgender service members, in effect, kicking them out of the military. It was effectively slow-footed by his own military commanders, and now it appears that there's a decent chance that current transgender members may very well stay in the military. On Venezuela, you'll remember a few weeks ago, the president said there are military options on the table for Venezuela, and then Mike Pence found himself on a trip throughout Latin America, seemingly walking that back and saying, no, that is not administration policy. You see it on the Iran nuclear deal, where members of his administration say Iran is complying. The president says it's not. So this has become a sort of state of being in this administration, and I don't think we should underestimate the confusion that it engenders, not just, again, for me and you, but for allies and adversaries alike.
Jim Sciutto, thanks so much. We'll check back with you. Let's talk more about this, about the messaging between North Korea and the White House, and the apparent undermining of the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Joining me right now, Republican Congressman Francis Rooney of Florida. He is also on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman Rooney, thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you, Frederica.
So what's your interpretation of what's going on here, this messaging that is direct contrast with earlier messaging coming from the Secretary of State, from the Defense Secretary, that diplomacy should be the first and the priority route for the White House?
Well, first, there's no doubt that anyone seriously looking at this situation would seek a diplomatic solution and want to avoid armed conflict, which in this case would be highly destructive to a lot of people.
But is that what you interpret from the message from the president, who says, don't waste your time?
Well, the question becomes, what combination of words and acts are most destined to accomplish that result? And I may be a minority in this, but I think that the strong words that the president has used recently, combined with Rex Tillerson saying some very appropriate diplomatic things, has set the table for maybe Kim understanding that he won't be appeased like he has been for the last 30 years with 3 successive presidents.
So what do you mean? Do you believe that it is a clear message that's being sent, if not just to North Korea, but then globally, when you have the president who says, don't waste your time on diplomacy, but then you have Rex Tillerson, the top diplomat, saying, we've got these open lines of communication that we can and that we are exercising? Those sound like two different things.
Well, they are two different things, but they're part of they're part of an entire story to present to the Chinese and to North Korea. You know, when you take Trump saying, I'm not going to talk to you anymore, and Nikki Haley saying basically the same thing, and then you have Rex Tillerson saying, we don't want regime change, we don't want to take over the entire peninsula, you're setting the stage to maybe get more engagement out of China, which we've seen. China's more engaged in finding a solution here than we've ever had them. They've been willing to put on sanctions even on their own companies and banks that do business with North Korea and cut off their iron ore imports and things like that. So, you know, I think there's some things that are being accomplished by taking a clear stand.
Okay, but you've got the Secretary of Defense who's also saying diplomacy is the first route, exhaust all options diplomatically, and the military options should be last. But when you have the president who says, don't waste your time, that says don't waste your time on any more words. does that message also undermine the Secretary of Defense's message? Military options should be the last options.
Well, again, nobody wants to use military force to deal with North Korea, but we've got to make North Korea authoritarian realize that it's not the same game that it's been for the past 30 years, where he can act up, we'll talk to him, we'll do some kind of temporary agreement, and he'll go about his business. And we need China to work with us to accomplish that.
So what do you think the interpretation is? If you're North Korea, if you're Kim Jong-un, what's the interpretation when you see this tweet from the president? I told Rex Tillerson, our wonderful Secretary of State, that he is wasting his time trying to negotiate with Little Rocket Man. Save your energy, Rex. We'll do what has to be done. What does the president mean we'll do what has to be done?
What I hope is that Kim's sitting there looking and saying there's a new sheriff in town here, and it's disruptive and unpredictable, and I better be careful what I do. And at the same time, I think he's sitting there saying, wow, we've got China involved now. The United States has said they don't want regime change. China, that's a good thing for China. And I think he's getting hemmed in. I just don't think that we've been successful in 30 years trying the overt diplomatic approach without walking softly and carrying a big stick.
And how different is this method of back channels that the U.S. can exercise and is exercising, that Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, just explained yesterday? How different is that than what you've seen exercised in previous administrations?
Well, I think that offers a promise of being effective, especially if it's coupled with back channel activity by China, who, really basically controls what North Korea does.
As it pertains to Puerto Rico now, the president just 2 days away from embarking on a trip to see for himself the devastation after 2 hurricanes. What's your expectation from the president and the ongoing relief efforts, or the answer to the calls of those who have been hard to reach in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, I've heard that they can land airplanes at the airport, but the roads are so beat up that they're having trouble getting material distributed out of the airport. It's a horrendous, devastating tragedy that's occurred there. And of course, we've been dealing with one in Southwest Florida for the last 3 weeks as well. And I will say, when the president and the vice president came down with Governor Scott, Senator Rubio, and me, and Congressman Diaz-Balart, and we toured around, I thought the president showed great compassion and empathy and concern for the people whose homes and mobile homes were destroyed in Hurricane Irma.
Congressman Francis Rooney, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Frederica.
So just 2 days now ahead of the president's visit to ravaged Puerto Rico, Trump touts job well done by FEMA and the U.S. military. This as a spat between the San Juan mayor and the president continues to escalate. We're live.